Hi, Steve Cassidy here again for part 3 of my little history of the web. We got to the late 90s in the last video, where we had been through the browser wars and things were starting to be established. The technology was very widespread, lots of commercial organizations on the web, and very high, sort of starting to get high penetration of the web as a platform for publishing things. In 97 we saw the advent of this thing called blogging. So this chap called Dave Winer started a website called Scripting News, and he developed this little standard called RSS for rich site summaries, or really simple syndication, which allowed, which basically was a way of publishing news stories as an XML document so that other sites could make use of it. But basically the idea of writing a blog, a web blog, which term was coined around that time by this chap John Berger, and we started to see some blogging tools evolving so that you could have your own blog. And so this was the start of the idea of people publishing their own content and being authors on the web, creating content rather than just consuming content. This website called Slashdot came into being. So the joke in Slashdot was this address, http://slashdot.org. Was just a technology news website. It still exists today, although it's quite a different thing than it used to be. And this idea, this term was called the Slashdot effect. So the Slashdot would publish a story about a new website or a new service, and then everybody who read Slashdot would go click on that link and bombard this site with traffic, and this site had just been set up by somebody in their office or something like that and couldn't cope with all this traffic, and the whole thing would crash. So you would get these sort of weird effects going around. So we're starting to see in 97, the late 90s, this idea of people publishing things on the web themselves, becoming the masters and the publishers and the authors. The web was very much a two-way medium at that time. It wasn't something you just consumed, it was something that you produced on as well as consuming. In the late 90s as well, we saw the establishment of peer-to-peer file sharing, and this very famous company Napster was set up to enable peer-to-peer file sharing, particularly of music, of MP3 files. This MP3 standard was invented around that time to compress music into much smaller files than it would normally take up. Dormitories, colleges in the US would have these huge spikes of bandwidth as people shared things with each other. What it did was to basically allowed you to publish some files that were on your hard drive with anybody else on the peer-to-peer network. And peer-to-peer means that the other person connects directly to you. So it's not done through the web. This isn't a web technology. This is just an internet network technology. So the end result was peer-to-peer traffic was blocked by universities so that people couldn't do this, and legal action was taken by the music industry, and Napster really didn't last very long as an organization, as a business. It lasted until 2001, but it really did change the landscape for distribution of music. In 2001, Apple released this little application called iTunes, the iTunes music player, and very soon followed with this portable music player called the iPod. At that time, you had to buy your CDs and rip the songs from there onto MP3s, which you could put on your iPod and listen to them and carry them around. By 2003, the iTunes Music Store was created, and that allowed people to buy music directly and put it straight onto their iTunes application, and therefore onto their iPod. So we're starting to see here the beginnings of the online music industry in the early 2000s. Another interesting sort of observation around the late 90s was the what's called the dot-com bubble. The time around, when Napster came around was a huge time of investment in the internet. People were realizing this internet thing, it's going to be huge, it's going to be big, and they were thinking up ideas of something that you could do on the internet. It would be some website like buying and selling pets or something like that, or talking about pets. So these things would attract huge amounts of investment, as people thought that they would make lots and lots of money out of these internet companies. And then the majority of them just went broke. So sometimes it worked, you had Facebook, and usually it didn't. So Pets.com, which we don't know anything about now because it just went bust very quickly. And so you can see in the graph the amount of investment in internet companies went up and up and up and up and up until it just crashed. In the 2000s, the dot-com bubble burst and the bottom went out of the market, and it went from being very easy to get a job in the IT sector to being very hard to find a job because everybody had trained themselves up, and then all these companies went broke. We've recovered from that now. We're back at the sort of levels probably higher now than the dot-com bubble in terms of employment and investment in the industry, but it was a significant time in the industry at that time. Another significant event in 2001 was the first offering of a course at Macquarie University called Web Technology. It was the first time this was offered, and it was taught in the Perl language. So in fact, the schedule that you see here wouldn't be the first one. We used Perl in the first iterations of it, but you might see some bits and pieces that are similar to what you'll see this time in Comp 249. In the early 2000s, we got this thing called Web 2.0 as well. So I mentioned the idea that you were creating content on the web, writing blog posts and things like that. Web 2.0 was all about the read-write web, was known. So user-generated content became king. So blogs, wikis, tagging things, video sharing, mashups and things like that. And so all of this sort of went together to form Web 2.0, and again, I guess sort of feeding on the buzz of the dot-com bubble. All of these companies starting up and trying to create this new world, this new way of exchanging data and exchanging information. Later on in the 2000s, we started to see this thing emerging of the social network. 2002, we had Friendster, which had 1 million users. Then 2003, MySpace, which was really a music-focused website at the beginning. 2004, Facebook was really a thing about college students sharing information about each other. You may have seen the movie. 2006, MySpace has 100 million users, and News Corp buys it for $580 million. And then in 2006, we get this website called Twitter launched, and nobody could quite work out what to do with it. By 2007, they had 60,000 tweets a day. 2008, Facebook overtook MySpace. 2010, 50 million tweets a day. 2011, News Corp sells MySpace for just $35 million. So they didn't do very well out of that. So the social network, really, the whole idea of a social network grew in the early 2000s, and sort of you saw things come into being like Friendster and just go away, and MySpace come and go away. And then really the small number of players survived out of this to today, and who knows what will happen in the near future. A momentous event in 2007 was the release of the iPhone. It was really the first device that would allow people to browse the web while they were on the go in a mobile context. Closely followed in 2008 by the Android operating system and the first Android mobile devices. So these were the first things with a real mobile web browser. Before that, you had sort of cut down browsers on some mobile phones, but nothing really that would work. And so really 2007, just 10, 11 years ago now, was the beginning of the idea of the mobile web and the idea of a mobile user base for websites. The idea of designing things for the mobile web then was totally out of the question. You just didn't do that. It would, people would make do with what they could. But by 2010, we started to see this idea of responsive design, which was really saying that, well, when you're designing for a website, you should think about what will happen when you're looking at it on a mobile phone. So things will get bigger, for example, on mobile phones with fonts and things like that. By 2013, we're actually seeing what's called mobile first design, where people don't think largely about the design of a desktop website. They really think about designing the mobile website and then how it will look on the desktop. So that really flipped in a very short period of time the way we think about designing sites, because now, of course, the majority of web users are mobile web users. And so the majority of design that we do, we've got to really consider the mobile web design. So we've come a long way from the very early days in the 1960s of the internet exchanging information between 4 computers to the mobile web, where there's a web browser and potentially a web server in every pocket, and the ubiquity of the World Wide Web. So it's a long way. Who knows where we're going to go next? We've got a totally different landscape to what we had now, and it's very hard to predict what might happen in the future. But that was just a bit of a view of the history of the web, and I hope it helps putting things into context for you.